And
Hold on, let me click next one.
yep.
There we go.
And then one thing we always do is give them claps so we know where we start. And then we can line everything up on the clap. So I go. So, you're Lyle Anderson. You were born July 17th, 1933. The youngest of 4 children to Arvid and Helen Anderson. And was that in Bram? Were you born in the farmhouse?
Stanchfield.
In
at
Stanchfield,
the farmhouse. You
at
bet.
the farmhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the same farmhouse I remember as a kid?
Same farmhouse. It was completely different at that time. We did a lot of remodeling on the farmhouse over the years. But yes, it's the original home.
What do you remember about being a kid? What was a typical day as a child?
Our childhood on the farm was incredible. The farm operated on the interest of the entire family.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody pitched in and did their own thing and to help that farm make it. When we were growing up, Joyce and Jane and Lloyd and I and Mother and Dad all went down to the barn together, did chores.
What time would you get up in the morning?
About 6 o'clock. And we each had our own chores to do during that time. Some of us had to feed the animals. Some of us cleaned the barn. Some of us had milking to do.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us had baby calves to feed. And of course the horses were there too. So they all had to be taken care of. When chores were done, we'd all go up to the house and have the most wonderful breakfast. And at that time we had leisure. We had time to sit around the kitchen table. And of course we didn't have television. And we did have a radio, but the radio was not played unless the whole family was together.
That was that battery radio, because you hadn't had electricity yet, right?
No, we didn't have electricity at that time. In fact, I was 15 years old when we got electricity, running water, an indoor bathroom.
So that was 48.
That was 1948. Yeah, that's when
Wow.
electricity first came to the farm.
The Rural Electrification Act.
Yeah, and that, in fact, was initiated by our grandfather, Andrew Anderson. He was one of the instigators of getting electricity to the rural area.
Really? I didn't know
He
that.
was on the board of the East Central Electric.
Okay.
And he would go around and solicit to the farmers that they should be thinking about hooking up to electric power, build or put in power poles.
Was that a tough sell back then?
Tough sell. It would never happen. How are they going to run electricity to our farm through those wires
Really?
and have it work? And the danger of having electricity in the barn, most people couldn't imagine that.
Wow.
So Grandpa Andrews was on the board of directors for the REA. And he would be gone for 2, 3, 4 days soliciting farmers to hook up to the power. And he was on the board of directors for East Central. So in his day and age, he was really a pretty aggressive person.
Yeah, that was very progressive for the era.
Yeah. So anyway, we had this farmhouse. And
It started with the little kitchen in the front, right?
kitchen was in the front. Kitchen was a large kitchen.
Yeah.
And because that was where everybody gathered, was in the kitchen.
Right. And that's where the heat was in the summer.
That's
or in the
where
winter.
the heat was. And we had a round, what was called a warm morning furnace that we had in the living room.
Okay.
And that would be filled with coal. And the damper would be closed, so it was a slow burn. So we had some heat all night long. And then in the morning, Dad would get up and he would shake the coals and get the fire going nice. And to heat the upstairs where Joyce and Jane and Lloyd and I slept, we had separate bedrooms for the girls and the boys. The heat would go up through a floor register.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning you'd grab your clothes and pull them in bed with you to warm them up a little bit. So when you got out, in the wintertime, you could have some somewhat warm clothing to put on. The old farmhouse was a wonderful place. However, in that day and age, in the 1930s and 32 and 35 and 37, there was no insulation to speak of in the walls. And the windows, of course, the wind would blow through. In the morning, when we had a snowstorm, there'd be snow coming through the windows, around the frame of the windows. So it was chilly. And but that was a day and age when you didn't complain about those types of things. That's just the way life was. Nobody questioned it, and we weren't the only ones. Everybody up and down the road had the same type of experience when they were.
It was better than sleeping outside.
Better than sleeping outside. So I really enjoyed our childhood in that manner, that everyone pitched in together. Money, we didn't have money to spend, but we didn't realize that we didn't have money to spend. We didn't realize we were poor.
Sure.
On the farm, every summer we'd have large gardens. Mother would, we'd harvest potatoes and vegetables, and Mother would can, and we had a potato bin in the basement of the house, and the potatoes would last till spring until we planted a new set of potatoes. And so food was never an issue. We had our own meat. We'd butcher a pig ourselves, hang the pig from a tree limb, and get the meat prepared to process on our own. And those were all good learning experience.
Yeah, you sure knew where your meat came from when you had to do that.
It was
right?
good meat. It was good meat.
Oh, yeah.
So we never were hungry. Mother always had a lot of chickens. And so we had eggs. She did a lot of baking. The eggs, we would have an egg case that we'd take to the grocery store and trade eggs for food. Johnny Homeblug, who had the grocery store in Stanchfield.
Was this down at the base of the U in Stanchfield or the
Yeah.
base of the Y?
Yeah,
Right. So that wasn't a mile away.
about a mile.
About a mile, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would have a running account. And so when Mother would go and buy flour or baking supplies, it was put on a credit sheet. And then she would bring the eggs in, and they would check the eggs out. And her eggs were always perfect and clean and very marketable. So he'd run a credit and a debit slip. And Mother and Dad were always up to date on that credit debit slip at the grocery store.
You bet. You bet.
And so those are good times.
So you knew, everybody in the community knew their eggs were coming from Helen.
Yep. Yeah.
And I'm sure other people had things in the grocery store as well. Everybody traded through the local grocery store.
A lot of trading went on in that community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So money really wasn't exchanged to speak of.
Right.
Mother and Dad started out with a potato farm. They raised a lot of potatoes because the farm had a lot of good sand, which potatoes liked for growing. And then that market seemed to fall by the wayside over the years. So that's when Mother and Dad went into dairy. And so we had dairy cows. We had 16 cows that we milked.
Okay.
And of course, then we had the team of horses, and we did all the field work with horses. The horses I remember were a pair of dappled grays that we were so proud of, Queen and Pearl.
Queen and Pearl.
And Dad always saw to it that we had a pony and a saddle horse. So as children, our recreation was really horses
Mm-hmm.
and playing games together as a family
Mm-hmm.
and having relatives come over all the time. They seemed to gather at the farm all the time. The other thing I remember as a kid is the local farmers. 9 o'clock in the morning, local farmers would somehow stop over at Mother and Dad's farm. We'd all gather around the kitchen table. Mother would put the coffee pot on. She'd have fresh bread almost all the time called finger rolls
Sure.
and sugar cookies. And we'd sit around the kitchen table. Nobody was pressed for time. We'd sit and visit for probably an hour. And it was just such a relaxed way of growing up. Never any pressure anywhere. The farmers would get together and do the planning for when they would do their harvesting, and things like threshing and silo filling was on a rotating basis, and the neighbors would all go and help each other do all these threshing bees and silo filling, and that was really the highlight of the season, is
Sure.
getting together and do these projects.
Well, every farmer didn't have to have all the equipment like they do now.
No. A fellow by the name of Bill Sandy had a thrashing rig that was pulled by a steam engine. And he would go to our place and Charlie Matson and Little White and Bartheens and all the people that were on this rotating threshing period of time. And of course, all the women, when it was their turn, like when the threshing crew came to our place, it was always a contest of the ladies who could prepare the best meal.
Oh, sure.
And the meal was just fabulous. Everybody was a good cook. All the mothers of these families were just great people. So I always looked forward to threshing and silo filling because there was big meals and good visiting with all the neighbors that participated. It was just a wonderful period of time.
Yeah. No electronics.
No.
Nothing to worry about like that.
None whatsoever. One of the fun things that we did at the farm house was a very old house, and it needed a lot of updating. It didn't have a basement in it. So Dad finally bought a Farmall H tractor in 1945. And it was the first Farmall tractor in the area, and on it he had a Super 6 manure loader. And Dad decided as long as we had a Super 6 loader, we'd see what the tractor could do. So it was decided that we should build or put a basement in under this farmhouse. So we started out by going about 50 feet away from the house, and we dug a trench with the loader to the back side of the house and got it down low enough that we could get the manure loader inside the basement area, what would become the basement area.
Okay.
So we hand dug a basement under that house, and as we were digging, we got jacks to shore up the house.
Sure.
And we got that whole basement dug one summer. This was in between doing all the chores and the farming and
Wow.
the crops and everything
You
else.
said this was 45?
1945,
So you were 12 at this point.
12. Mm-hmm.
And you're digging a basement out from under your house.
Digging a basement, yep. And Dad had a fellow come in to lay the block, and we were really concerned about a lot of things. We shorted up underneath with jacks, and there was always a concern if we had a storm coming, because this house was jacked up in the air,
Sure.
and we were really happy when we got all the cement block in there, and the footings, of course. and got this house back down on the cement block. So that was quite an achievement. So we had a nice basement in that farmhouse.
I remember the basement in the farmhouse. It's
Yeah.
amazing to think that you could do that underneath an existing building.
Yeah. Well, it took a lot of hand shoveling,
Yeah.
and it worked good. The loader really helped with the project because we could load the bucket, we'd back tractor out, dump it in a big pile, and then we used that for landscaping after a while.
Way down yonder in the Indian Nation, I ride my pony on the reservation in those Oklahoma hills where I was born. Now way down
Great,
yonder in
great
the Indian Nation, the cowboys
childhood.
Now, when did Arvid buy that farm? Do you know?
He bought the farm in 1927, I believe it was.
So about the same time he and Helen were married.
Shortly after they were married, a 80-acre farm. And
80 or 8?
80.
80. That's a good sized farm.
Yeah. He paid, I believe it was $4,500 for the farm at that time.
Okay.
Took out a loan from the bank. And at that time, I believe he was paying like 6% interest, which was very high when you think today.
Yeah.
You can't get 1% or 2% interest on money. Back in the late 20s into early 30s, 6% was unbelievable.
That was pretty high.
Yeah. But it all went together and worked out very well. So then after we got the basement in, and that's the time we put in a septic system and put in, started to get running water and got a bathroom built in and started updating the farmhouse. And the farmhouse turned out to be just a beautiful home. We had an open staircase going up to the second floor and made a very nice living room, dining room, separate dining room, very large kitchen, a bedroom on first floor that Mother and Dad used, and then the bathroom was on first floor also. So that really simplified things. Mother was just an extraordinarily good housekeeper. Every week she would clean both floors of that home. And when everything was dusted and spotless and in the kitchen, because we always had a lot of traffic, and we had a linoleum floor in the kitchen, and she wanted to save that linoleum floor. So after everything was scrubbed and cleaned, it would be covered with newspapers. The whole kitchen floor
Really?
was always covered with newspapers. And then sometimes the newspapers wouldn't last a week, but she kept it covered. And then, like Sundays, the newspapers would all be gone and the floor would be left in linoleum. And so she was quite an ingenious woman.
Oh, playmate, come out and play with me.
What I remember about coming home from school, we went to a pine cone schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse that had grades 1 through 8. Joyce and Jane and Lloyd and I would walk to school, which was about a mile away. Mother was the janitor at school. She did the scrubbing and cleaning, and the kids would all take turns pumping water to bring in for drinking water. We had an outside toilet. Heat was a huge wood-burning furnace in the one-room schoolhouse. Anna Plinsky, the teacher, would get to school early in the wintertime, start the fire. Wood would always be in there because we'd lug it in. And she'd start the fire maybe an hour and a half before school started. That was part of her job. And so when we got there, the schoolhouse was warm. So we were always comfortable. At noontime, we had a little gasoline or kerosene burner. We'd carry water in put in a copper pan or tub, and Mother would send along vegetable soup in a glass container that we would put in this hot water to warm up. So we had warm soup in the wintertime.
Okay.
Summers we carry our own sandwiches in. And at the school we had that outdoor bathroom. And nobody complained.
Yeah.
That's the way life was, and it was wonderful. We had this pony by name of Chester. Occasionally, we would ride Chester up to Highway 65. And Chester learned that we got to Highway 65, we'd get off, and we didn't want to have Chester cross the highway in case a car would come, which doesn't happen very often on Highway 65 at that time. And we'd turn Chester loose, and Grandpa would be waiting, or Dad would be waiting at the barn door with a pail of grain. Chester knew his treat was there, so he would gallop home and get his treat when he got home. And such fun.
I'm back in the saddle again, out where a friend is a friend, where the longhorn cattle feed on the lowly Jimson wheat. Back in the saddle again.
Now, you used to do square dancing with your horses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The neighbors were all interested in horses. Part of the neighborhood was the Matson girls. And they were, there were 4 Matson girls that participated in horseback riding. And this is all through grade school and going into high school and then even into college. We would get together weekends. That's how we'd spend our weekends. We'd go for trail rides. And evenings after chores were done, the Matson girls and Lloyd and Joyce and Jane would get their horses, and we'd meet somewhere and go for a trail ride till maybe 8:30 at night till it started getting dark. And then after a period of time, when I was in about 8th grade, we formed what was called the Saddle Club. The name of it was the Rum River Saddle Club. And there's a little river by the name of Rum River that ran through the area into Cambridge. And that's how it got its name. And so the Matson girls and Lloyd and I decided that it would be fun to start a square dance on horseback. And we had a friend by the name of Ole Grip that we found out called for square dances for people to come to a pavilion for evening entertainment and square dancing. So why can't we do this with horses? So Ole came over and he had his own little phonograph that he had, and he would call square dances. And so we learned how to do the square dance on horseback. 8 people in it, 4 women and 4 guys, and of course the 8 horses. And we got to the point where we were going to the Cambridge County Fair to show square dancing on horseback. And somehow the State Fair Board in Minneapolis and St. Paul got wind of this, and I don't know how all that happened, but they started to have a contest with square dancing on horseback. And so we were invited to the Minnesota State Fair to compete with other saddle clubs that had developed square dancing on horseback. And we were all decked out. We had white bridles and white breastplates on the horses, and we built our own chaps out of white linoleum, not linoleum, but tablecloth.
Linen?
So it looked flashy. And we had or scarves on our neck, and we thought we were really something. So we all went to the state fair to compete, and I'm not sure how many years in a row, but I think it was like 4 or 5 years in a row we won first prize.
Wow.
For the square dance team, and there was some pretty good competition after a while. So that was always fun. So our childhood with that, and Mother and Dad really sacrificed a lot to see to it that we got the transportation, got the horses to Minneapolis or St. Paul to the state fair, because not having a lot of cash available, we were always very, very thankful for having parents like we have.
Well, now that would have been almost 60 miles probably to the Twin Cities.
Twin Cities was about 60 miles away.
And I bet horse trailers weren't all that common.
No.
How do you get 8 horses down to Minneapolis?
No, we didn't have horse trailers. We had a cattle truck. Charlie Matson had a cattle truck.
Ah, nice.
And we would squeeze the horses in. My horse, whose name was Champion, was always the last one in there because he knew how to get his head and shoulders in around the corner and pull his rump in to get past the gate.
Well, Champion was quite a horse. He was the one you trained to do shows, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Dad, when we got bigger so that Chester was too small for it, we bought a horse from Charlie Matson, a paint horse from Charlie Matson. We named it Champion. It was young when we bought it. It's about 3 years old. Hadn't been trained at all. And so Lloyd and I, after chores, would spend a lot of time with Champion. And Lloyd's horse, his name was Trixie, a beautiful horse. So Trixie was very well broken. That's one of the horses Lloyd would use in the square dance team. And we thought it'd be fun to do some training of Champion. So over the period of that summer, we taught Champion, I think is about 12 different tricks. He would kneel, say his prayer, lay down, sit up, camel stretch, which was stretching all 4 legs out. The end of the trail, which is, you've seen the Indian pose on a paint horse on top of a rock with all 4 legs together and the head down. He would do that. You could ask him questions and he'd say yes or no. And
You had him counting as well, I believe?
we had him counting, yeah. And then we sent out letters to different county fairs. And I forget what we would charge, but in the letter we would say we would come to your county fair and put on a show with a trick horse. And Lloyd did the announcing. And I had Champion out in the arena and doing the tricks. At that time, this was still all kind of new to people to think that a horse could be trained that way. So we had the advantage of not having a lot of competition and something unique and different for the county fairs. And we got paid for our transportation. Mother and Dad would always come along. Of course, Joyce and Jane would come too. And Mother would always pack a picnic lunch that we could have. And everybody else, I shouldn't say everybody, but most people would have picnic lunches. We'd get together and share and tell stories. Then we get Champion ready to put on a show, usually in the afternoon and evening. And then at the end of that, we'd all load up and come back home and collect a check for it. So that was really fun to be able to do this when people weren't real familiar with that type of entertainment. So
Sure, it was something new. That would have been, what, about 40 or 50 at the height of the cowboy thing?
well, it would have been, I was still in high school at that time. So that would have been about 1945, 46, 47, somewhere in there.
Sure. About the same time electricity came through.
Yeah. But you have to admire having parents that would take the time to let you do this. Go to a fair and put on a show. And a mother that would pack this picnic lunch. And so the only cost would really be the fuel, the gas to get there. And it was the afternoon entertainment for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just great fun.